Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Perfect RIA podcast, What Works Wednesday edition. I am your host, Matthew Jarvis, and with me today we have another rockstar advisor, which is really my favorite way to do these podcasts. Another rockstar advisor who happens to also be a Perfect RIA member, an Invictus member, who has a great practice in California, Southern California. And we're going to talk today, Bryan and I, we're going to talk today about kind of pushing your comfort zones, which is something that all of us need to do continuously wherever you're at in the practice. And so, Bryan, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks, Jarvis. Excited to be here. It's going to be fun.
It's going to be a ton of fun. Well, why don't you start by telling everybody a little bit about your practice, about your kind of journey through the industry, and then we'll kind of jump into getting uncomfortable.
Yeah, absolutely. I actually want to thank you and a couple of other, I think Michael Henley was on your podcast earlier, but I listened to you on Kitsis way back when, and you were one of the reasons that I jumped ship from the wirehouse world and we started our own RIA. So I want to thank you for that. But kind of going into where we are Triagen Wealth Management in Southern California. We left the wirehouse world 2.5 years ago. It's been the best thing that we've done. And prior to that, we were at the wirehouses for the last 13 years. My senior partners for 30 and 40 years combined. So
wow.
Talking about pushing the limits and getting uncomfortable, bringing senior partners over and starting our RIA 2.5 years ago. It's been a lot of fun. But yeah, now we are at that next step and here at Triagen.
I love that. Tell us a little bit about your departure from the wirehouse. And of course, Michael Henley is a good friend. I'm actually going to see him in a couple of weeks from this recording. We do a mastermind together. But again, talk about being uncomfortable. When I talk to advisors in the wires or in the captive BD, the idea of breaking away, the fear of that almost borders that of like my young kids and the boogeyman under their bed. Like there's really like this boogeyman of if you break away from the wire or the captive BD, the SEC will eat you alive.
Yeah, thankfully it wasn't too bad. I mean, a lot of preparation and had done a lot of preparing. I had been wanting to do it for a good while, and yeah, trying to pull the team along, saying no, promise the grass is greener on the other side. But once we made the transition, it worked out really nicely. I mean, it helped that we were in COVID times and everyone was around and available and on their computers and able to DocuSign and make all the transfers happen and go from there. But just looking at what we can do on the RIA side versus what we were doing at the broker-dealer side, and that kind of comes to what I'm sure we'll be talking about with our value adds and how we do financial planning now. Really being in the RIA world has allowed us to do what we want to do and run the practice how we want to run it. And so making that transition, wish we did it earlier than 2.5 years ago after making the break. So, yeah.
Bryan, I love that you said, thankfully we were in COVID times. And I only just
yeah,
that
right?
makes me chuckle. If only because you could obviously turn that the other way. Like, no, we can't make this move, right? Whether for you going independent, for other advisors raising fees or implementing value adds or surge, like, oh, I can't do it because it seems though there's always a because. Like there's always a reason to not take action. And a once in a generation or a once in a lifetime pandemic seems like a good enough reason to not take action, but you guys pushed through.
Yeah, right in the middle of it. And again, getting uncomfortable and saying, if not now, when? And you could do that forever, right? We could keep saying that and, we'd be still sitting and not taking advantage of the opportunities in front of us.
Yeah, I love that. If not now, when? And like you said, there will always be a reason to defer that. Well, let's talk about, since you mentioned, let's talk a little bit about how you're doing value adds in your office. Every office does them a little bit differently, if only because our offices are all structured differently. We have different systems, we have different niches. But tell us a little bit about how value adds work in your office.
Yeah, I mean, I'm going to take it back actually a little bit. So
please.
After our move, it was successful and kind of got back to the normal routine of, okay, we're doing back normal portfolio management, financial planning. And was listening to you and Micah and said, you know what, I got to get more intentional about how I want to run the business, how I want to get more efficient, and how can I build the plumbing so that if I want to double my revenue or I want to double my clients, that I've got the building blocks for that. And so what we did is got really intentional. I went and followed through the Invictus program and got the calendar, mapped everything out. I remember my employees were looking at me when I brought the calendar out, started marking off what days we're going to be off, what days we're going to be on. I don't take client appointments on Mondays and Fridays now. So all those kind of things, started getting really intentional how I wanted to see this past year go. We eventually hired a new person, and so we added the value adds. We added, I would call it a pseudo surge meeting, and we've gotten very intentional about the value adds we provide on a quarterly basis, how I meet with clients on a quarterly basis, and what that looks like. And that's just made us hyper efficient and allowed us to grow, defining roles and responsibilities from that. And so, yeah, we've gotten really honed in over the last 11 months here.
Oh, I love hearing that. What were some of the struggles? You mentioned, outlining that calendar for your team, and your team might have gotten kind of big eyes, like, wait a second, you're not going to see clients on Mondays and Fridays, and we're going to do these different things. How did you overcome that? What other struggles came up throughout that process?
I think a lot of it was just getting really down to the scripts of just, hey, being super intentional of what we're trying to say, how we're trying to say it. Certainly there were plenty of times in the first couple of months where hold on, let me see if Bryan's available. And, as you said, no, we gotta change that out. So, going through that, practicing, making sure we were very deliberate. And thankfully there was not too much pushback, but a lot of buy-in to see why we're doing what we're doing. And so when you got the team adoption of, we're doing it for this reason, because Mondays and Fridays I'm focusing on working on the business or doing portfolio management or doing trade, right? We've got this set up to where they know why I'm not available, not necessarily, having them have to come up with the ammo of why I'm not around. And so it's led to that hyper efficiency. And I think it's allowed us to then start adding more things where I have my staff doing value adds like tax letters, beneficiary reviews, and structuring it that way.
Love it. I'm sorry, I'm just taking notes here as we go. There's so many good pieces. You mentioned scripts and highlighted that quick example, the one that always drives me crazy. Like, let me see if Bryan's available, which for our longtime listeners, you'll remember, like, that's code to the client of saying, hey, let me see if you're important enough for Bryan to talk to you, right? They know if Bryan's in the office or not, right? I'd be curious, Bryan, how did your team pivot that, or how did you work to pivot that? How does your script kind of look on that now? When a client calls in and says, hey, I've got a question for Bryan.
Yeah, I stole it from you guys, right? I mean, one of the things that I've said is, hey, if you're calling your doctor's office, are they going to transfer you right over to the physician? And they're not going to say, let me see if he's available right now. They're going to take a message. What's this about? Let me see if there's something I can help you with. And if not, great, I'll leave a message for the doctor and he'll get back to you to discuss the relevant topic. Same thing, right? So once you kind of frame it that way, they start getting it, it starts clicking, and they understand why they need to do it the way they need to do it.
I love it. I love it. Bryan, whether it was the changes to the scripting, to the meetings, Mondays and Fridays value adds, you mentioned before we kind of got started about kind of getting comfortable and being uncomfortable. What are some things that helped you with that? What's some advice you'd give? I mean, all of us as advisors, myself included, right? We have these things that we know we need to do in our practice, but we've got these reasons, these excuses, these justifications. You've made a lot of big changes in the last couple of years. Is there anything you can give us that helped you overcome each one of those big discomforts?
I mean, I think just having the accountability partners, one of the reasons for joining a mastermind or having a coach and holding you accountable for things. I think just if you're complacent, you're not necessarily pushing your boundaries, right? I know a lot of times when you're planning for the next year or doing goal setting, people will necessarily put a goal that they can achieve so they can check the box and say, great, I've made that goal. And I think if you're truly trying to grow your knowledge, your business, your practice, you're going to have to push the boundaries. And so holding yourself accountable to that and getting uncomfortable, pushing yourself outside of that comfort zone is truly how you're going to grow. And so where else to do that by actually working with advisors who are pushing the boundaries, who are changing things and how things are done in the industry. And so when I see that, I kind of take that from you guys, certainly the Jocko Willink approach of, hey, extreme accountability. How do I make sure that if something's not going the way I want it to, how do I turn it on myself and make sure that I'm pushing the boundaries on that end? I don't know if you've ever even listened to David Goggins, but he he's also kind of say, right, stay hard, just do it kind of deal. And you have the combination of those kind of things, and I just think you could turn it to the financial planning practice and do the same thing, and that's going to help you grow as an individual and for the firm.
Yeah, boy, interesting you mentioned David Goggins. His book, it was Can't Hurt Me. That was his audiobook is fascinating. Did you read the book or did you listen to his audiobook?
Audiobook,
The
yeah.
audiobook. That's intense, man. That's
He's very intense, but there's no excuses. You just
no.
go and you've got to push your boundaries. You just again keep pressing play, and that's the way you're going to actually grow and again make actual milestones by doing the everyday hard things.
Well, I love that. Uh, Bryan, any examples that come to mind of that you wouldn't mind sharing? Right. So I loved what you talked about. It's easy to set these goals where you think, well, I've got like a 99% chance of hitting that one. Like I'll be able to check that box, which by the way, I think is why email is so seductive. Like, oh, what should I do right now? Oh, you know what I can do? I can check my email and I can delete a couple and that'll be super productive, but it's not. I guess the same goes for annual goals or quarterly goals. So I'm just wondering any goals that you would mind sharing or that you set in the past where you said, well, that was a goal. I wasn't quite sure if we were going to make that one.
Yeah, I mean, I think for the value add type things, we had none going into this year. We made it for our surge for Q2 was to do tax return reviews, and out of this year, we've done as of today 250 tax return reviews.
Wow.
So going from none to 250 and pushing the boundaries and saying, great, how are we going to improve upon that? That's going to lead to better tax letters for Q1 when we deliver those. So just kind of pushing the boundaries there and making sure that you're doing the tough things on that end, which will then also just feed itself into the revenue and to the higher goals that you might put to say, hey, do I think I can make this revenue jump, or however I'm going to increase my bottom line by X. If you start taking those smaller steps and going that direction, it'll build and then make those maybe once not thought of as achievable goals achievable. So,
oh, I love that. Boy, and going from doing no tax return reviews to 250, that's a pretty substantial jump, man. That's a lot of systems in place. That's a lot
a lot better versed in going through tax returns, that's for sure. So, but I've even had clients who say, do the CPAs know you're doing this? And it's like, yes, we work in conjunction with them. Oh, great. And this is all part of, yes, it is. Great. And we've gotten referrals from that, and we've grown the business just by implementing those things. And it just baffles me that I hadn't done it before. So being able to build on that and then saying, great, in 23, how are we going to improve upon what we've just done in 22 and then raise the bar?
I love having that milestone, right? What did we do this year and how can we do it better next year? It becomes this constant cycle. I find for myself, it helps me avoid a lot of imposter syndrome, right? Especially when markets are down. Sometimes we think, man, what am I doing to earn these fees? Oh, I'm doing this tax return review that I've never done before. Or if you've done it before, it's getting even better. My 1099 letter is getting tighter, all of those things.
Yeah, I've had, obviously all up through our surge meetings and meeting with all of our clients, yeah, we've talked about the markets being down, but we haven't had the normal panic calls of what do we need to do. It's been the action items of, yep, we did your return. Great. Now's the time for the Roth conversion instead of waiting till the end of the year. Now's the time to look at, making sure we're being as efficient as possible. Now's the time to look at our guardrails or our buckets. We're not going to refill the bucket this year because the market. So all of those things that we've been preaching upon or talking about over the last 3 quarters for value adds, great. Now we're focusing on all of those things and not going to what's the market going to do in the next 3 weeks, or is the Fed going to hike? I don't know, and we're not going to try and even go into those conversations. We're going to talk about things that are relevant to you, and keeping that to those handful of bullet points for a client, I think does a huge favor and service to them, because then it's not focusing on how my performance is on a daily or monthly basis.
Bryan, I'm glad you bring that up, man. I guess I hadn't thought about that directly, but on the one hand, we could look at value adds like the tax return reviews and say, boy, that's a lot of work. But on the other hand, as you just point out, in a lot of ways, of course, it's delivering massive value to the client. That's goal number one. But in a lot of ways, it's actually making your job easier because to your point, instead of like, well, let's look at the performance reports and let's all complain about the markets being down and try to predict the future, which is kind of a lose-lose proposition, you can, as you said, acknowledge, hey, the markets are down, but great news. We're set up for this. We were prepared for it. We need to make adjustments. Here they are. Here's the Roth conversions. It gives you so much more to focus on than what was the performance today.
I had someone last week, we pulled up guardrails and say, look, you're nowhere close to the lower bound. We don't need to do anything. And, oh, okay, great. And we'll revisit it. So I think, by building those processes and systems, it allows you to then provide the customized advice because you don't have to spend that time talking to the, end client about why the markets are down and no, good investment behavior. Granted, it's important,
Of
but
course.
we're focusing on the things that are actually actionable to that specific client because the systems are in place.
I love it. Bryan, we're jumping around a little bit here, but that's what I love to do. It's our podcast. We can talk about whatever we want. You mentioned guardrails and an example of a client who is not yet to their lower guardrail. Have you run into clients that are at their lower guardrail, and how does that discussion, or clients that are approaching it, how does that discussion go?
Thankfully not. I haven't had anyone go below it.
Nice.
But it has been okay, if the market's correct another 10%, we're going to have to be having a discussion. But showing what the actual cut is not as draconian as some clients might feel. And they say, great, I think I could do that if we need to. And so that's where in setting up those systems, Q1, we're going to go through anyone doing withdrawals. We're going to go and redo the guardrails and say, here's where you are, upper and lower bounds. And we'll keep an eye on that throughout the year. And that takes away some of the worries for clients about, do I need to be doing something? And them knowing that we're on top of it and where and how it would be actionable.
Yeah, I love that. That's the exact same experience I've had in my practice, right? To go be able to sit down with a client and say, hey, Mr. and Mrs. Client, until we get to 800,000 or whatever that lower guardrail is, we're totally fine. And then even for clients that say, hey, I know we're not there yet, but I really want to do something, I can say, well, great. If you feel like you really need to do something, you can go ahead and reduce your income by the lower guardrail amount until things get better. And it gives them somewhere to direct this feeling of, I need to do something away from, let's change the portfolio or let's do whatever, buy crypto, who knows what, to, okay, let me control what I can control. So it's exciting, Bryan, to hear that that's been similar for you.
Yeah, no, just again, putting those systems in place and making sure that we have those deliverables, those value adds to bring them back up and bring it again. So if they feel like they have to do something, great, we've reviewed it. We don't need to necessarily make a change to withdrawal, but that's where those Roth conversion conversations are here, the things we can do in a bear market that will take advantage. And, that's where I think you're truly adding value as a planner.
Yeah, we've had definitely, I would imagine all the listeners, a lot of Roth conversion discussions and have certainly done an incredible amount of Roth conversions, which is a lot of fun.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, Bryan, are there other things that come to your mind, whether it's being uncomfortable or making changes that you think that our advisors, there's now some 50 or 60,000 downloads a month of this podcast, which is really exciting. But if you were listening to your first episode, is there any other kind of action items or advice that you would want to impart to the audience, to the nation?
I would just tell you to actually take some time. I know there's a lot of people who will go in and think putting together a business plan doesn't necessarily make sense, or a lot of times some of the business planners or the coaches don't necessarily bring any value, but getting intentional, going through a year, a month, a day processes. I mean, the amount of time we've spent on workflows just for simple things so that we've got our business built to where we're honed in. We've got everything set up to where, great, if we wanted to grow and continue to grow, we're not causing issues because our staff knows their roles and responsibilities. We know how everything's going to happen, and that's allowed us to actually free up time and get more customization for clients. And so doing that business plan and actually getting intentional on how you're running your day-to-day will just build upon your practice.
Boy, that's a great recommendation, Bryan. That's a good way to transition into a couple of action items for this episode. So I would probably say the first one would be, to your point, is really map out. And you talked about pulling out the calendar, and I do the same thing in my practice. So does Mike. So do a lot of advisors now. Sit down with your team. In fact, as you and I are recording this in a week or two, we're doing our annual team retreat, and we'll map out the calendar for the entire next year. When will we do surge? When will we have our value adds? What will be the value adds? When will we do client events? All of those things. So they're on. I'm curious, do you use a physical calendar for that planning, or is it all digital?
Got it hanging right on my wall, and I got the 23 calendar that I'm doing in the next week or two with my wife and family first, and then with the staff, and then go in that direction. So, yep, we're in that season to start planning it out. Exactly.
That's good for you. You do the family first and then the business when you're doing that?
So I'll do family first. I'll say, okay, what vacations are we looking to go on? Here's where we're doing it. And then I'm going to build my 2023 calendar around that. Love that. Yeah.
Man, really, really props to you, Bryan, for that. It's easy to say, hey, family is a priority, and then we squeeze them in when there's gaps on those days off, but you're really going in family first. I love that. Well, Bryan, I appreciate you so much being on the podcast. Really respect the things that you've been able to do in your practice. It's fun to hear that we're all kind of equally uncomfortable when it comes to implementing new things. So thank you again so much for your time, and for all our listeners, until next time, happy planning.